All right, good evening, everyone, and thank you for attending tonight's informational meeting on some mobile gear fisheries management issues. I'm Dan McKiernan, the director at the Division of Marine Fisheries. And tonight I have some staff who will be presenting along with me, who are subject matter experts regarding shellfish, fisheries management, and permitting. Dr. Chrissy Pettypass is our shellfish program leader. Story Reed is our assistant director in charge of permitting and statistics. And Jared Silver, who many of you know, is our lead policy analyst who takes the lead on matters concerning state fisheries regulations, compliance, and enforcement. Also joining us tonight is Deputy Director Bob Glenn. I also believe Travis Ford from the National Marine Fisheries Service is on to join us tonight, and I thank him for helping us with some of these issues. From our Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission, I believe we have 4 members: Chairman Ray Kane, Vice Chair Mike Pierdenach, Khalil Bogdan, and Suki Sawyer. This meeting is designed to inform our mobile gear participants and wholesale dealers who purchase shellfish or finfish from those vessels, particularly the vessels who fish in state waters. We routinely have an early winter meeting of the mobile gear fishery participants to discuss ways to improve the management of some of our quota managed species, such as summer flounder and horseshoe crabs. But tonight, we're going to broaden the conversation to cover some other issues, including the harvest of scallops and surf clams from state waters, and how the classification of waters relative to contamination levels may affect the ability to harvest those species, and also the disposition of the catch and the tagging requirements as well. Over the past couple of months, we've had some challenges. There were 2 cases of fishing that allegedly occurred in waters that were classified as prohibited. This was fishing for what we call shell stock, whole scallops and surf clams, not shucked meats, but for whole scallops. This resulted in a recall of the product from Interstate Commerce. And while this is a routine response, that is, the recall is a routine response as part of the program, and can be accomplished without much controversy, the negative publicity that was generated by some press releases by the Federal Food and Drug Administration was very challenging, and it caused significant angst all across the waterfront. And some seafood consumers were confused about the safety of scallops and also of some clams. And I think this has a negative effect on the seafood industry, certainly on those businesses, but also on the seafood industry as a whole. So tonight we're going to spend a fair amount of time describing the regulations governing the fishing with mobile gear in state waters and the intersection of our conservation regulations with the shellfish safety standards. The goal of this meeting is to educate all fishery participants, both harvesters and dealers, to ensure compliance with our regulations and to prevent vessels from being violated, prevent any future shellfish recalls, and improve the seafood consuming's public confidence about seafood safety. 2 other issues will be discussed at the back end of this meeting, and that would be some of our proposals that are going to be publicized for public hearing very imminently. We're expecting hearings at the end of February on the 20th and the 29th on some of our other issues, such as the fluke quotas and the horseshoe crabs, things like that. And then an update on a pilot program that we're running that is testing the utility and the efficacy of the vessel trackers on surf clam vessels fishing in state waters. Vessel trackers have already been required of the federal lobster permit holders, and we're trying to see if that technology could really help us with the management of the surf clam fishery and allow us to more, modernize the management of that fishery relative to the times and places of fishing. As many of you know, or some of you know who are on the call who are involved with the surf climb fishery, our rules are more or less unchanged for almost 40 years since we enacted them in the early 80s. And we have a real strong interest to make some changes to that fishery that I think would be beneficial for the fleet as well. So finally, this event is designed to allow us to educate the industry, but also to receive questions from you all on the call or on this virtual meeting, and also to get some feedback. To participate in the discussion, and Jared, you can help me with this. Anyone who wants to speak, use the raise hand feature in the Zoom program. Is that accurate, Jared? You want to?
Yeah, we'll have certain kind of pre-scheduled Q&A periods. When we reach that, feel free to use the raise hand feature. That'll create a queue. I'll call on you based on that queue. Also during this meeting, the chat function is open, and I'll be monitoring that as best I can. So if there's something you want to mention or comment on as we go by, you can use that, but we'll be dealing with questions directly during the Q&A periods. So follow some of the sections.
Okay, thanks, Jared. So on the screen is the agenda for tonight. So there's a lot under number 1 about shell stock sea scallops in state waters. And this tries to get at the challenges of an enforcement case last month that did cause a lot of angst and a lot of confusion. So we're going to talk about permitting. We're going to talk about time area closures. We'll talk about how you handle shell stock and tag it. And then, of course, for dealers, how to report that and how to deal with the primary purchases of that. Numbers 2 and 3, we just talked about the other mobile gear issues, but the most important thing for me is this number 1 tonight, and try to get everybody on the same page so we don't have enforcement and compliance problems going forward. So I want to introduce Chrissy Pettypass, Dr. Chrissy Pettypass, who is now in the Shellfish Program leadership role officially. Congratulations, Chrissy. And she's going to talk about the model ordinance, and I'll let Chrissy give you those details. So go ahead, Chrissy.
Sure. So the model ordinance is basically a component of the National Shellfish Sanitation Program. It's the vehicle by which the program explains all of its standards and criteria for the safe harvest and handling of shellfish. It's specifically for commercially harvested shellfish and those that are meant to go into interstate commerce. So any shellfish that our state puts into interstate commerce has to adhere to standards implemented and voted on by the ISSC, the Interstate Shellfish Sanitation Conference, which is it's a cooperative program, and where all of the member states, so states that want to put their product into interstate commerce, also non-producing states who want to have a say in the standards for the program, so that they know that the shellfish that they're bringing into their state is all of consistent sanitary quality. And so these standards end up getting voted on at biennial ISSC conferences. So they develop this model ordinance, and they establish methods, they adopt standards and practices. And when they're adopted in the conference, they end up in the model ordinance, and it's basically the law of the land for any state that wants to have their shellfish product cross state lines. We try our best to adopt model ordinance into standards into our regulations. In Massachusetts, DMF is the regulatory authority authorized to govern the shellfish harvesters and to implement the standards of the NSSP to the harvesters, and the Department of Public Health, or DPH, is the regulatory authority governing shellfish dealers. the Massachusetts Environmental Police is also another agency that consists of that makes up the triad of state shellfish authority, because they have the enforcement end. So DMF permits and regulates the shellfish harvest in accordance with the model ordinance requirements. And one of the major requirements is classifying waters, but I think we'll get into that in another slide. You want to move on.
All right, I can take this slide, Dan. So permitting requirements, first and foremost, to dredge for sea scallops in state waters, a vessel and the associated permit needs to have a mobile gear coastal access permit endorsement. So that basically allows you to use mobile gear, including a dredge, in state waters. From there, on the permit, if you want to land whole in-shell sea scallops harvested from either state or federal waters, you would also need a shellfish endorsement, which is a no-cost endorsement. No shellfish endorsement is required if the vessel only lands shucked meats, but in that case, the permit would need a sea scallop shucking endorsement, which again is at no cost, and it just indicates that the boat is going to be shucking at sea and landing scallop meat harvested from either state or federal waters. The shellfish transaction card comes with the shellfish endorsement. So automatically, if we issue a shellfish endorsement on a permit, a transaction card is printed for that permit. And on that, it has the permit holder's name, permit number, and the year. The shellfish endorsement and that transaction card are not required to possess, land, and sell sea scallop meat, but it's needed for landing in-shell whole sea scallops. The transaction card is, by regulation, is supposed to be used in conjunction with your state-issued, government-issued picture ID, your driver's license. So a captain of a boat, or in the case of shellfish aquaculture, an employee also needs their own card. So we issue employee transaction cards. So in the case of dredge boats, any hired captain that possesses or sells whole in-shell sea scallops without that named permit holder on board or present must obtain a shellfish captain's permit with the associated employee shellfish transaction card. And again, that we issue that permit at no cost. The application's on our website, or you could do it in either our Gloucester or New Bedford office. These transaction cards create a hard record, or help create a hard record documenting the sale of shellfish to establish traceability to protect public health. And like I said, the state-issued picture ID must be presented or available at that primary purchase and must match the person on the transaction card. And that could be so a dealer could verify, or law enforcement. The shellfish affidavit is a document that must be read and signed by all persons who obtain a shellfish transaction card or that shellfish endorsement. So annually, we, even at renewal time, we have people fill out and sign that shellfish affidavit. And we've adopted this affidavit, Chrissy and Jared, at least a half dozen years ago, as a means of complying with NSSP requirements for harvester education. So for now, that is our method of complying with that education requirement. We have other ideas for the future, but that is what we have now for that education requirement.
And Story, if I could just add one little detail, basically the shellfish identification card for the captain, that's analogous to like the employee of an aquaculture company, where we're not issuing a new permit, but we're issuing multiple cards, associated with that permit, so that either the captain or in the case of a drag or scalloper, or a aquaculture employee, in the case of an aquaculture farm, that employee could be present and make the transaction without the permit holder present. So it creates a level of accountability.
That's right. That's an important detail. Ed, we tie it together with the business name, essentially. So we have a parent permit, and that has a business name, whatever it is. And the employee transaction card has the employee's name or the captain's name or the employee of the aquaculture operation, and that business name and the parent permit number. And that's how we tie it together, because the parent permit, you know, if I'm your captain, Dan would do the reporting under that permit, but because my employee transaction card is kind of tied back to your permit, we can see that those sales are supposed to be attributed there when we look at it down the road.
Yeah. Okay. Next slide. I think this one's yours, Jared.
Yes, I'll take the next few on this. So as Dan said at the outset, you know, we regulate the gear, the harvest of the fish, and then the sanitary control of shellfish. So starting with the gear, DMF through the commission regulate the use of mobile gear throughout state waters. This includes various components of the gear, such as dredge width, ring size, and twine top. Historically, we've prohibited night fishing as well. And the closures you see in the map on the right depict when and where mobile gear can be fished in state waters. The red area, Area 1, is closed year-round to mobile gear fishing, with the exception of the hashed areas, Area 1A and 1B off in Ipswich Bay and off Gloucester Rockport, which are seasonally open. The orange area, Area 2 off Boston, is open seasonally from January through March. And then the two pink areas, Area 2 and Area 3, are open seasonally from November to through April. And that controls where mobile gear can be fished. And mobile gear would include sea scallop dredges as well as trawls. It does not apply to the surf, clam, and ocean quahog dredge fisheries, nor does it apply to any mobile gear that would be fished in a municipal shellfish fishery, such as bay scallops or bay quahogs. And these closures are historic, and they date back at this point almost 100 years. And they were designed to prevent user group conflicts and gear conflicts and protect sensitive inshore habitats. So next we'll deal with how we address the sanitary harvest of shell stock. And as Chrissy said, through the NSSP, there are guidelines set for how we classify certain waters. There are 5 classifications: approved, which meets the sanitary conditions to allow for harvest for direct human consumption; conditionally approved, which allows for has sufficient water quality to allow for direct human consumption under certain conditions and subject to a camp with the municipality who controls those waters. So that would be areas where there may be closed seasonally due to diminished water quality, or may be subject to rainfall closures that may cause diminished water quality. Then we have conditionally restricted and restricted areas, which both have a limited degree of contamination at all times and are closed to the harvest for direct consumption. We do make allowances for relays and depuration of shellfish going from those areas for the purposes of being cleaned and eventually consumed. And lastly, are prohibited areas, which are subject to contamination at all time and closed to harvest for direct consumption. Prohibited. So these classifications are based on not just contamination present in the water, but also potential sources of contamination, such as a wastewater treatment plant outfall. And we are required under the NSSP to close areas around wastewater treatment plant outfalls and maintain them as prohibited areas to create a buffer should the plant malfunction. shellfish growing area that's classified as approved or conditionally approved may be subject to status changes, which means it may be open or closed. Based on environmental conditions that affect water quality. That may be, large amounts of rainfall, a treatment plant failure, an oil spill, red tide event. And we will close the status or open the status based on those, but that does not affect the underlying classification of an area. So an area may go from approved in the open status to approved in the closed status, or conditionally approved in the open status to conditionally approved in the closed status. And then we may lift that closed status back to the open status, but it doesn't change its baseline approved, conditionally restricted classification. Those classifications are based on sanitary surveys. Chrissy, can you speak a little bit more to the sanitary survey process and what goes into opening and closing, or changing the classification of an area?
Sure. So in order for harvest to happen in an area, it has to have a sanitary survey if this is the first time that the area is being classified. And what that involves is a very comprehensive assessment of both the actual and potential pollution sources to the area. It involves for areas that actually have shoreline, that the shoreline be walked, so that we look for pipes, whether they're discharge pipes, CSOs that may be discharging untreated or partially treated sewage. Some pollution sources could be wetlands that have a lot of birds. So all of those potential pollution sources need to be assessed. And also what goes into the sanitary survey is some sampling, some water quality monitoring. So there are standards, there are fecal coliform standards for each of these classifications that Jared just explained. And you have to have a certain number of samples and data before you can even give an area a classification. And then, you have to assess the data, you have to, go through all your pollution sources, and based on standards set in the NSSP model ordinance, that will determine which of these classifications a certain area is eligible to receive. And so the Shellfish Program, they really are field warriors going out in all weather, year round, sampling these areas and try to maintain the least restrictive classification possible. So if something happens where we're getting some bad samples, then these biologists try to investigate it. Maybe it's not the nature of the area. Maybe a house on the shoreline is having septic system failure. And then we can try to identify that, get the town to remediate it. And then maybe we don't have to downgrade the classification. We can just say it's just going to be in the closed status until we can fix this problem that we identified. And then once you've established a classification, the sanitary survey needs to be repeated every 12 years. And so again, it's a complete comprehensive assessment of the area, and including the shoreline survey, biologists is walking the shoreline. And then we also have triennial survey. So every 3 years, there's another look at the area just to make sure that the data makes sense for the classification, to make sure that there aren't any new pollution sources. If there's a wastewater treatment plant discharging into the area, we'll check their discharge monitoring reports to make sure that they're maintaining the conditions set in their discharge permit. So it's something that is a constant effort in the Shellfish Program to maintain the monitoring of these areas, to make sure that the shellfish harvested from them are of sufficient sanitary quality for public health reasons.
So relevant here to the sea scallop fishery and following up on some of the incidents over the past 6 or so weeks, there has been some interest in area N1, which is the red area you'll see out by the Merrimack River, the north part of Massachusetts, and MB14, which is the area in the center of Mass Bay, both red and classified as prohibited. And those classifications are due to I believe the Seabrook and the MWRA sewage treatment outfalls. And they've been classified that way for years. Sorry. And to potentially reclassify these areas, Kristen, correct me if I'm wrong, we need to first examine the impacts of the outfalls to determine how much dilution would be necessary to provide a buffer around the outfall before reaching approved waters. We'd have to have enforceable buffers, so you'd have to have areas that would be enforceable if there were an area outside the buffer that could be classified as approved. And then we need to begin a sanitary survey for those waters that could potentially be classified as approved to determine if the water quality is sufficiently good enough to open up for the harvest of shell stock. And that would take at least 15 water samples. And best case scenario, we're looking at a 2+ year process to potentially open those areas or segments thereof. And if they were to be open, we'd have to conduct at least 5 water quality tests per year in those areas to maintain that classification. Chrissy, am I correct in that?
Yes, for the most part, except that when it comes to the wastewater treatment plant effluents, it really is all about the volume, and the MWRA outfall has 250 million gallons a day being discharged. So we would not be able to open additional area just because we're already not adhering to the recommended 1,000 to 1 dilution line, because if there's such a high volume that to dilute that to 1,000 to 1, we'd be talking about losing everything north of the Cape Cod. So in terms of the existing prohibited area around the MWRA outfall, we would not be able to make it any smaller and reclassify that just based on the sheer volume being discharged. And that speaks nothing to the quality of the discharge. The plant, is a very, well-run plant, and, typically doesn't have, interruptions in the disinfection. It's just the FDA and the EPA even has very, they expect dilution because we're not testing everything that could possibly be coming out of that outfall, whether it's viruses, chemicals. So that expectation for that closed buffer zone is something that for that specific area, we're not going to be able to change.
And Jared, does everybody know which area we're talking about? I don't know if your cursor, that's good. Thank you for that.
That's
Yeah.
MB14, that's N1.
All right, thanks. All right, Jared, next
So,
slide.
The next slide, and then after this, we'll take some questions and comments. So this is the interface of the mobile gear closures with the sanitary closures. So you can commercially dredge for scallops in any area that's open to mobile gear fishing. Whole and shell scallops can only be retained from growing areas classified as approved and in the open status, provided they're open to sea scallop dredging. Shuck meats can be retained from any growing area that's classified as approved or classified other than approved, or any growing area in the closed status. So that means if it's open to mobile gear fishing, you can always retain adductor meats, regardless of the classification or the status. But the area has to be in an approved classification and an open status and open to mobile gear fishing to retain shell stock. And for enforcement purposes, all sea scallops must be shucked if a trip occurs at any time within any growing area with a classification other than approved in an open status. So if you're up in Ipswich Bay and you're fishing in these areas here during the mobile gear opening, they're all classified as approved. So if you're fishing from N1 on south, you have to shuck these sea scallops. You can't retain whole and shell scallops. If you're not fishing in N1, you can retain the whole and shell scallops from a trip that occurs across these areas to the south of N1, the light blue areas, provided they're in the open status. But they have to be tagged separately. We'll get to that after the Q&A section. So what this map on the left does is it breaks down the 5 kind of conditions controlling the harvest of shell stock, and when and where you can retain whole sea scallops. So the green areas are always open to mobile gear fishing and in an approved designation for shell stock harvest. So those areas are places where you can year round retain sea scallops, whole and shell sea scallops. The blue areas are seasonally open to mobile gear fishing. And during those seasonal openings, you can retain either shucked product or whole and shell scallops, as those areas are approved. The light yellow area, MB14, is open year-round to mobile gear fishing for sea scallops, but in a prohibited status, so only the adductor muscle can be retained. The orange areas are open seasonally to mobile gear fishing, but in a prohibited status, so only the adductor muscles can be retained. And the red area are those areas that are closed to sea scallop dredging. So the map to your left shows the kind of the 5 different statuses for what type of fishing activity can occur. And then the maps below kind of blow up the 2 North Shore areas, that are of most interest at present, which is Ipswich Bay and the center of Mass Bay. So we'll go to take some questions and comments. So please use the raise hand function, and it will create a queue, and I will call on you as they come in. Mark
Yes, sir.
Blackowitz, you're up.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can, Mark. How you doing?
Okay. All right. I got a handful of questions. Now, having a little hard time with the chart. I'm colorblind, but MB8 is open for live scallops, correct?
I believe all of MB8 but a sliver on the north end, which is classified as conditionally approved, is open currently to both mobile gear fishing and whole and shell product.
Jared, could you
Okay.
point out where that is for everybody on the call?
Sure, give me 1 second. So Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're talking about this area here.
I can't see where you're pointing,
So
but it's right south of MB14.
yeah, the area right south of MB14, the northern part of that heading towards Cohasset Harbor, that is orange, is closed
That's
to whole sea
that's
scallops.
MB9. That's a different
There's a
area.
little sliver there that's actually MB8.1 as
Okay.
well. But MB8 just to the south is open to that. If you give me a second, I can pull up a map of MB8.
Well, I don't. So now that is far closer to the outfall pipe than the northern end of MB14, which that eastern line of MB14 is almost 20 miles long. And on the federal side of it, you can keep live scallops, but you jump over the line and they're contaminated. And I look at a distance and just using MB8 as a reference, MB8 is far closer to the outfall pipe than most of MB14, and it's closer than most of MB14 is to other outfall pipes, or a good portion of it. Can you hear me?
Yep.
So I mean, I think MB14 needs a division in it. It's far too big of an area. It has no land for any biologist to have to walk around. And I think it was, I mean, I forget what year it was we got the samples to open the state back up. I don't know if it was maybe '06 or so when we got samples to open Ipswich Bay up. And I don't recall anyone I know I didn't take any samples in MB14. And I'm curious when the last when, if ever, were any of the last samples taken in MB14. And I think that area needs to be divided. I mean, when you look at it, like right along, you go just east of that line, and that's all open for live scallops.
Jared, could I share my screen, please?
Sure.
It's telling me host disabled screen sharing.
All right, give me a second. I'll enable it for you. Should be able to do it now.
Okay. So can you guys see the map? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so this is the area we're talking about. This is MB14. These sort of concentric circles, those are the locations of the outfalls. All of these are wastewater treatment plant outfalls. And so you can see the outfall is right in MB14. And so, sorry.
Correct. Can you still hear me?
I can still hear you, yep.
Okay, so measure the distance from the outfall pipe
Mhm.
down to MB8. Okay, right
Uh-huh.
to the northern corner of MB8, right there,
Mhm.
and draw a radius around it.
Right, so you're arguing to have
And
more area closed?
there's still more than half of MB14 that is way further away from an outfall pipe than MB8 is from the biggest outfall pipe.
Mark, I get what you're arguing, but to Chrissy's point earlier about dilution, I think you're arguing incidentally to close more waters. Because if we were to go to the dilution effect to try to get that, we'd probably be closing down onto the South Shore into Cape Cod Bay.
So we couldn't.
So while you're making an argument to open up areas of MB14, I think the argument is also would move us to not open MB14, but have to close a lot of the MB areas and some of the Cape Cod Bay areas.
All right, so he's saying there's no chance that MB14 is going to be open for live scalloping.
Given the discharge from that outfall, I can't imagine that would meet current FDA criteria.
Okay,
correct.
all right.
And to your point, for the waters on the other side, those are federal waters that we're not responsible for. So we can't speak to that. The same thing, if we go down to the other end of the state, if we look at our Fall River outfall right here, we're discharging, and unfortunately it's going to Rhode Island. We're not responsible for classifying Rhode Island waters. So we're not worried about that. They have to. We do have, the FDA does come annually and evaluate our implementation of the NSSP. And one of the things we've had some conflict with is that 1,000 to 1 dilution. The FDA's guidance, they feel strongly that there should be 1,000 to 1 dilution of water coming out of wastewater treatment plant. And we would need an order of magnitude more water if we followed their guidance, and that would close all of Cape Cod Bay, basically everything north of Cape Cod, if we listened to that guidance. So that's why, I understand your point, but this is using about 130 feet in this area, trying to take into account as much volume as we can. But really, already, this is us minimizing what would be expected of us by the FDA.
I gotcha. Yeah, I just was looking at the distance of it and it didn't make sense to me. And I'm a little blurred on why you can't divide it, but that's okay. I mean, if it's a moot point, it's a moot point. But another thing with the maps you had is area one that's closed to mobile gear permanently is closed due to gear conflict. And while during the right wheel closure, I think it should be open to mobile gear.
Yeah.
I don't see any reason that that it shouldn't be. There's no gear conflict. There's no gear there. Um, can we open area one?
So, Mark,
Um,
we took public comment on that about 5 years ago to run a pilot program. And I've been with DMF now for, I think, 15 going on 20 years. And that was single-handedly the most unpopular thing we have ever proposed during my tenure. So we moved to do a
5 years
pilot
ago, we didn't have a
program.
right wheel closure.
Yeah.
I mean,
We-
I'm just talking during the right wheel closure.
Yeah, no, that was just a wintertime seasonal pilot program for scallop dredge fishing in a portion of that area off Nahant. And it was one of the least popular public comment responses I have ever seen in my role. So we didn't pursue the pilot program and we haven't pursued a exemption to those areas since.
But that was when guys were still storing gear and fishing lobster gear there during the winter 5 years ago. Now there's zero gear there. There's
Hey, Mark, can
Uh,
I ask, which area are you actually talking about? Because the closure goes from Winthrop to New Hampshire. What area are you asking to be opened?
I would say from Cape Ann down to Boston.
Okay.
In front of Sale. I mean, I understand how unpopular that was 5 years ago, but guys stored gear there then
All right.
and kept gear. There's zero gear there during the right wheel closure, and I don't see why. I feel like if the state wants to help mobile gear guys out at all, give us a little more, give us a turn at it for the 4 months while it's gear free.
No, okay, that's a fair comment. Are we taking mostly questions at this point, Jared? Or
It's
is-
questions and comments.
Okay, all right, so that we'll take that comment. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah.
Anyone else have any questions? I know it's kind of complicated with a lot of terminology about open and close and restricted and all that, so.
Jared Auerbach? Jared, you're muted.
Yeah, you got me?
I got you. How you doing?
Hey, good. Thank you all very much for doing this. It's very helpful. Couple quick ones. One, so did you say that a boat can they travel through a closed area with shell stock on board?
Yes.
Okay.
If you were
All right,
coming
sorry,
down
misheard
from
that.
Ipswich Bay to land in Boston, you could travel through that North Shore closed area
Okay. All
with
right.
shell stock on board. They just have to be
Right.
tagged.
All right. Yeah, sorry, I misheard that. This is more of a scientific question that I just don't understand. It's like, obviously this all makes tons of sense for raw oysters and raw clams, but like, I just don't understand scientifically, like, it's intuitive. You should not eat an oyster where you're like eating all the guts and everything. Why scientifically is a scallop meat? Like, is it the raw? I guess to the point for it's specific to live scallops, but the question also applies to surf clams. But specific to live scallops, are you concerned, or is the FDA concerned that our customers are eating the roe, or that our customers are eating guts?
The concern is that the scallops harvested whole could be eaten. The entire animal could be eaten, and that's the roe, that's other tissues within the scallop. Really, both for sea scallops and bay scallops, only the adductor muscle does not accumulate both pathogens and biotoxins. Now, in the case of pathogens, yes, a cooked product for the most part will kill pathogens. Biotoxins won't be killed. won't be, destroyed by cooking or freezing. So that's something where the biotoxin, such as red tide closures, are even more serious. But when you're harvesting for shucked product with just the adductor muscle only, that's why the classification doesn't really matter. The only thing that's directing where you can harvest in the case of shucked product is just the mobile gear closures.
Yeah, our customers are not buying live scallops from us because they want to eat the guts. They're buying live scallops from us because it's a premium product that they can, they're killing it in their restaurant. So I think, I mean, in my opinion, I appreciate your explanation. I still fail to see why it's even considered a shellfish, or maybe it's considered somewhere in the middle where it's like, we put a warning on it saying only eat the abductor muscle. Everything else is poisonous.
Yeah. My understanding is
so-
there's an Asian market for these whole roll-on scallops, and they do eat the whole product. So there is a public safety risk there in landing this product.
Does anybody else on the call have any more info on that? Just that wasn't the impression that I had. But we should at least do some research. And so if there's a warning on it, then they can be prohibited from eating the entirety of the scallop, but we could still sell live scallops to people who just want to pay a premium for a high-end, small boat state water product. So, that I'm under the impression that's what our customer base is after, regardless of their nationality. Again, if anybody else can chime in, fine. I'm not trying to drag this out to sort of hear that comment, but then same thing for surf clams. And in surf clams, we're not even often shipping those out live. We're buying them live off the boat, and we're removing, we're actually they get blanched in the process, right? And we're removing all the guts before it even goes out to market. So I sort of, again, I have no clue about the science. It's just really just a genuine question. Why do we treat surf clam abductor meat the same way we treat a live oyster that's intended to be eaten guts in?
Yeah, unfortunately, the National Shellfish Sanitation Program doesn't make that distinction. We have to, for any shell stock, we have no choice but to regulate according to the standards set by the national program.
Okay, understood. So really, the answer is the question is for them, not you. But do they specify that live scallops falls into that?
Live scallops? Yes, all shell stock, all live shell stock falls under the NSSP.
Yeah. Okay.
Chrissy, do we have a state industry rep to the NSSP that Jared could reach out to on some of this?
Yeah, thank you.
Maybe Bob Rowe. I mean, he's more aquaculture, but there's also I'm not a.
I'll track it. I don't want to waste people's time. Thank you all very much.
Jared, follow up with me on that, and I can
Okay.
work with staff to get some
one
information.
last quick comment. I just want to point out, you guys are doing a great job explaining this. This is very complicated. I just really want to plead with law enforcement to whoever's on this call to know that this is complicated. It's not straightforward. And I think everybody knows how I feel, but I'm going to say it. It should be a collaborative effort, to the benefit of the taxpayer, and to the benefit of for-profit businesses that contribute to this tax base. I just think there's a lot of good people in the industry that don't deserve to be vilified. Obviously, I think everybody's seen the damage that was caused to Intershell and Red's Best in the past month or two over this. This is not necessary. So anyway, but thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jared. Damian Parkington, you're next.
Thank you. I had just had a couple quick questions I wanted to clarify about seller's cards, going back to that. One was in the case of owner operator of two vessels. Should I be using my personal card or should I get a vessel card? Because somewhere along the line that changed and now I have just a personal card under one number.
Yeah, Damian, I can take a look at yours. I mean, if I'm trying to, I can't remember your scenario exactly, but if there's two boats, you know, and the permit holder has a permit on each boat, usually each one would have its own shellfish endorsement and therefore each one would have its own shellfish transaction card, but we can look
Right.
at yours.
Yeah, and then that's the follow-up question to that would be, what if you've got, you know, alternate captain that's
Mhm.
jumping between those two boats? So now, is he using specifically his card, or does he have a card for each boat?
Yeah, we
Like-
could set him up with at least one card under you, maybe two that are directed to each boat. So we can sort that out.
I got you. All right, and
Yeah.
second, on the map of Cape Cod, and I think it is OC 8. I don't know, but it's going south of Nauset Light. In one of those diagrams, it's depicted as open year round. To my knowledge, that area closed April 1, I thought it was. I thought that was a seasonally closed area for all.
Right. So yeah, this doesn't pick up that South Coast Mobile Gear closure. I didn't overlay that on the map. That's a good pickup there. But yeah, for May 1, on this area from Nauset Light down into Nantucket Sound is seasonally closed to Mobile Gear.
Gotcha. I was hoping I'd missed something that was open.
No, no. I was focusing on Cape Cod Bay and north with the Mobile Gear closures when I made that map, so I didn't overlay the southern closure.
And then, thank you. And then lastly, just to clarify, so live catch needs to be tagged before transiting any area that is closed conditionally. So if you're entering a harbor that is closed, it can't be tagged at dockside. Usually we tag kind of as it's like the last thing you do. You clean the boat, you do everything, and then you fill your tags out. Usually at that point you're transiting that last piece. I just want to clarify that moving forward, everything needs to be tagged prior to entrance of a closed area or a conditionally closed. Or
So give me 1 second, Damien.
and this is just for enforcement, I guess, and just my understanding of things.
I believe it has to be tagged prior to landing.
You're correct, Chrissy. Yeah, that's what I was just gonna say. But you know, to aid enforcement and to avoid potential enforcement issues, I'd encourage tags to be put on it as soon as possible, particularly if you're going to be transiting closed areas. But it is by law prior to landing.
Prior to landing. Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Franklin Carpenter.
Hey, how you doing?
Doing okay.
All right, good. You can hear me.
Yep.
If I have the shellfish identification card, does my permit still have to have the shucking on it?
Are you shucking?
Yeah, I'm in an area where I have to shuck them, so do I
Yeah,
need?
then you need the sea
shucking
scallop
on the
shucking
permit?
endorsement, but that's free to add on your permit. Just call one of our offices and they'll put it on.
Okay. That's all.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Eric Hansen.
Yeah, good evening. Can you hear me okay?
I can, Eric. How are you?
Great. I'm not inshore fisherman, but I am offshore. And there was a time when there was a push to land and sell roll-on scallops. We found a lot of pushback from the FDA with PSP. PSP is a biotoxin. It's unrelated to sanitation, and everything had to be tested in order for it to be sold. A certain amount of percentage had to be cleaned before it was the whole catch was determined to be clean. I'm curious how whole scallops can be sold live right now without that kind of testing. I think that should also still be on the regs. I don't see any reason for that to be taken off.
Chrissy, do you want to speak to the PSP monitoring that we do in state waters?
Yeah, so we have several primary stations where we're actually looking at the phytoplankton. And we also have primary stations where we have mussel bags at locations where we found historically we've had paralytic shellfish poisoning blooms. There are obviously offshore waters aren't monitored, and they have new designations where they have a brand new designation for these areas that could potentially have biotoxin risks, and we have to develop plans. And there are some, they recently changed it. It used to be called the shipboard testing, shipboard screening, dockside testing, but
Correct, yes.
right. And so that's a program where DPH is very hands-on, because the harvester, the dealer, and the feds also have to have a MOU, essentially agreeing to certain standards and testing practices. So we're actually having a meeting on this next week, because
Hey,
they're
So
Chrissy-
what you're saying is you're testing the waters and not the product to determine if it's harvestable?
So we're
'Cause
we're doing both. We're testing the water. We're looking at the organisms in the water as an initial pre-screen. That if we see the cells, then we may move on to testing the meats. And if the meats end up
Well, it wouldn't be the meats.
approaching the threshold, then we'll close.
It would be the roe and the offal. That it wouldn't be the meats because they don't have any. They don't retain the PSP. But the biotoxin for paralytic shellfish poison is everywhere.
Right,
just-
and I'm sorry, I'm using meats to mean all of the meat, and I'm confusing things by saying that. But typically we're using mussels as the sentinel
marker?
species, right? And so the mussels, for the most part, they take up toxins the fastest. They also depurate themselves of toxins the fastest. So we use that as a sentinel species to give us sort of the best real-time assessment of the risk, the biotoxin risk in the area. We don't actually test sea scallops. The sentinel species, the mussels, generally dictate what we do with the area. I do know in the past, because I did my dissertation research on PSP, and some of our collaborators did toxin testing, and yes, the roe bioaccumulates much higher concentrations of toxin than other parts of the animal. And as you said, the adductor mussel tends not to accumulate biotoxins or pathogens, and that's why the adductor mussels alone do not have to adhere to any of these classification standards.
Right. Okay. I just wanted some clarification on whether the live scallops were tested, but it sounds like they're not. It's just
Not
the waters
actively, no.
the waters that they come from are tested though.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you, Eric. Dominic?
Hi, Jared. Thank you. Can you hear me?
I can, Dominic. How are you?
Good. Just a quick comment. I support comment made earlier by, I think it was Mark, about the possibility of opening that inshore area during the when the lobster gear is out of there to mobile gear for scallops.
Okay. Anything else?
Nope. All right now.
All right, thank you. And Mark, I'm coming back to you now. Wanted to get everyone else before I gave you a second bite of the apple.
Can you hear me?
I can, Mark.
All right. Now we take contaminated soft shell clams and get them purified, right? In Plum Island. Could that be an option with live scallops? Hello?
Yeah,
So I believe we'd have to have a method verification. So these, we have never done it on live scallop. I'm not even sure if I have to double check with the model ordinance to see if depuration is allowed with live scallop. But if there wasn't, there'd have to be a lab validation to show that they could be successfully depurated. That's something, unfortunately, I don't have enough knowledge on it. I'd have to follow up on that question.
Okay, if there wasn't any information, could we do a trial run? I mean, I'm a contractor for the state. I mean, I could take a biologist and get some and, you know, to see if it would be a viable option.
Well, Mark, we'll consider that. I mean, it's a novel concept. We'd have to do a little bit of research, talk to the FDA and see what their expectations are. So, but we'll take that as a comment. I can't really give you an answer because it's never been done. And you know, these are federal standards that we have to comply with. And I don't know that there's a standard, like a standard level of contamination from which we need to reduce it back down to in order to consider it safe. I think you're in uncharted territory there. But we'll take that back and have an internal discussion about it.
Yeah, if we could find out, it might be an option. You know,
Yeah.
I know it would be important for some of us. So I'd appreciate that if you could look into that.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks, Mark. All right, I'm not seeing any other hands, Dan, so I'm gonna move on and go into the harvest and handling part of this.
Yeah.
So the next, Damien brought this up and about tagging. So we'll move on to this, you know, like oysters or quahogs, shell stock, whole and shell sea scallops have to be tagged by landing by the harvester. The model ordinance mandates the size and the contents of the tags. Tags are to be waterproof and durable. 2 5/8 by 2 5/8 by 5 and what is it? 5 1/4 inch width, not 5/14 width. The tag has to contain information on the permit holder, the permit number, date and time of harvest, type of shellfish harvested, quantity of shellfish harvested, the state of harvest, the alphanumeric sequence for the harvest area, and aquaculture site if applicable. And then they each contains that standard bold language, should be at the bottom of every tag. And that basically states that the tag will be kept at the dealer level for 90 days. Whole and shell sea scallops harvested in different DSGAs. So if you're fishing tomorrow in N10 and then up and then down into N11 for whole and shell product, then each container, each harvest from each area has to be held in a separate container. You can't commingle across DSGAs. For the state harvested shellfish, including whole and shell sea scallops, the information on harvest area would be the DSGA fish. So if you're in this area, that would be N11. On the federal side, I believe it would be the federal statistical reporting area would be the area in question. Story, correct me if I'm wrong, that'd be N19. I mean, not N19, that'd be SRA 19.
Right, for federal waters.
For federal waters. So if you're
Yep.
a state harvester only, if you're fishing in state waters, regardless of whether you hold a federal scallop permit, the whole and shell product you take has to have a tag on it with the DSGA it was harvested from. And
Sure.
again, this does not apply to shucked meats. This is just the whole and shell scallop.
You might see 514 on there for the federal
Yeah.
area too, instead of 19.
Now, harvest and handling, again, this applies to only whole and shell scallops. Doesn't apply to shucked product. And, you know, this just is, the sanitary control stuff is focused on making sure it's not, contaminated from another source or temperature abused. So, you know, they have to be stored in smooth and easily cleanable containers like fish totes. Those containers have to be kept free of debris and bilge water. You know, other contaminants like fuel. You want to keep them out of sunlight and away from birds to prevent cross contamination. If the shell stock are washed, the water has to come from either has to be potable or come from an approved area. So if you're going through a prohibited area, don't wash your shell stock with that water. If the shell stock are iced, only ice from a potable water source can be used. And they have to be landed within 18 hours of harvest during the summer period of May 1 through October 31, or on the same calendar day during the other period. Shell stock can only be sold to a licensed wholesale dealer authorized as a primary buyer, and direct to public sales are prohibited. Shucked product can be sold directly to the public under a DPH DMF policy and a retail boat permit, and shucked product under state law can't be soaked. And then just a reminder on the state trip limits of 200 pounds of shucked meat and 2,000 pounds of in-shell product, and the volumetric equivalent of one fish tote equaling 100 pounds of in-shell product. And that, you know, if you're transiting from federal waters through state waters, you're a federal permit holder, you don't have to comply with our trip limits, provided you're not stopping in state waters to fish. So that's that portion. And I'll take questions if there are any. And if not, I'll hand it off to Story for reporting and dealer requirements. All right, Story, I'm not seeing anything, so I'll give them a break from me.
All right, and I will go through these pretty quickly because I think most of you all are really familiar with the harvester reporting requirements. You gonna go to the next slide, Jared? Thank you. As you know, all commercial fishers are required to report to DMF at the trip level. And there's two ways to report. You're either a vessel providing federal VTRs to GARFO, and if you are, you're exempt from state reporting requirements. And so you would report to GARFO based on their instructions on those VTRs, and those are all electronic now. Otherwise, you're reporting to us at the state either on paper or electronic reports. The state reports collect elements including trip start and end dates, gear used, harvest area, species, estimated quantities, units of measure, intended disposition of the landing, and dealer to whom the product was sold. And for those state reports, the designated shellfish growing area must be provided for all gear reported that harvest shellfish. So obviously sea scallop dredge gear is one of those. We require designated shellfish growing area there. And if we see a report, you know, we do audits periodically on the paper reports. We're generally doing them as they come in the door. And we might reach out for what that shellfish growing area is or was for that trip. And we do audit the electronic trip reports periodically as well. Federal VTRs don't require that shellfish growing area. And if you have any questions about federal reporting requirements, obviously go to GARFO. If you have any questions for us at the state level, contact our Fisheries Statistics Project. The information is there, or stop by the Gloucester office or New Bedford office and somebody can help you. Okay. Primary buyer expectations, and what we're really talking about here is requirements for wholesale dealers purchasing shellfish. Wholesale dealers are duly permitted between DPH and DMF. DMF works closely with DPH's food protection program on shellfish safety issues, and DPH's food code regulations are at 105 CMR 500. So basically, when a wholesale dealer is permitted, the first stop is an inspection by DPH, and whatever the DPH food protection program approves you for, DMF issues that permit. And then DPH from there inspects periodically or regularly, especially for shellfish. Primary buyers of any shellfish, including whole in-shell sea scallops and sea scallop meats, must be wholesale dealers with a facility in Mass. We did mention the one exemption there for sea scallop meats, and that is a permitted vessel that has a retail boat permit that could do some dockside sales of sea scallop meat. Scallops may only be purchased from fishers with a valid DMF issued commercial fishing permit. And we've talked about that and the requirements of a shellfish endorsement and shellfish transaction card required of anybody selling whole in-shell sea scallops. The shellfish transaction card must be present at the time of sale of shell stock and match that person's state ID. Upon purchase of shell stock, primary buyers must create a transaction record using the embossed shellfish transaction card. And then that transaction record must be retained for at least 90 days. All these purchases must be accurately reported electronically into SAFIS on at least a weekly basis. The reported elements in that record that the dealer enters into SAFIS include the landing date, purchase date, fisher, vessel, species, marketing grade, unit of measure, quantity purchased, price paid, and the harvest area, which is the designated shellfish growing area for state waters that should be coming off the tags, or the statistical reporting area for product coming in from federal waters. Whole in-shell product may only come from a harvest area classified as approved and in the open status. Each container of whole in-shell product must have an accurate harvester tag affixed. Harvester tags must remain affixed until replaced with a dealer tag where that container is empty. Once removed, the harvester tag must remain on the dealer's premises for at least 90 days. Tags and transaction slips should be made available to DMF, MEP, or DPH upon request. Are there any questions or comments on any of that?
So Story, I think part of the problem that we've run into recently is when the tags have been recorded incorrectly, or the dealer tags haven't been recorded correctly. It raises all kinds of concerns and can result in recall. And you know what I mean? Especially if the vessel was seen like in a prohibited area, but that's not listed as the location, all bets are off. And the net result is, in order to keep consumers safe, you know, recalls were occurring. The recall resulted in impacts to the dealer. Then the publicity results in negative impacts to the fishery as a whole, and then and the whole seafood system. So I think it's really important that folks try to be as accurate as possible in terms of this part of the program, because it's kind of the honor system, but when it's not complied with, it makes it very difficult for everyone in the distribution chain.
That's right. That I think, you know, if it's confusion or whatever it is, but the outcomes can be really problematic. And I think carrying that accurate reporting from the tag to the safest dealer record is also really important. So I just want to emphasize that. We do periodic shellfish audits, and we work with Chrissy and her staff on that a couple times a year. But and I think overall dealers have gotten much better at reporting that area accurately through the efforts of these audits. But yeah, it's very important for this traceability piece.
Right. Okay. Thanks. Any hands up, Jared? No. Okay.
Not seeing any, so we can move on to the second portion of the evening.
Yeah. Well, why don't we wrap this up? We're kind of done with the scallop section of this. If folks want to drop off the call, if that's your only interest, this is probably a good time to do it. Thank you for participating, listening, and if there's any questions, please call us. We want to make sure that you're in compliance and not causing problems for yourself and your crew and the whole seafood system tends to can result in problems. So please call us. We'll do whatever we can to help you understand these complicated rules.
Dan, can I
And-
make one quick follow-up on the depuration request, or the comment on
Sure.
depuration? So
Yeah.
I actually looked up in the model ordinance, and we actually don't have a validation done for sea scallops. So the only methods that have been validated are for soft shell clams, hard clams, oysters, manila clams, and mussels. The other point I should have made in the first place when the question was asked, because it was asked, can we depurate scallops? And I just thought, well, can they be depurated? But on top of that is only product that comes out of restricted areas or conditionally restricted. So areas in the closed status that are not prohibited, depuration can happen if the species has been validated. But if the area is prohibited, then no, we are not allowed to depurate product that would be harvested out of a prohibited area.
Okay. Hey, before we leave this topic of scallops, Travis, if you're still on the call, do you want to make any comments or help us out with anything from the federal perspective, since a lot of guys do fish, in state and federal waters at times? Do you have any thoughts on any of the issues that we're going over here? Want to give you a chance.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Dan. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Travis Ford. I'm the scallop policy analyst for the Atlantic Sea Scallop Federal Fishery, and I work out of the Gloucester office at the Greater Atlantic Regional Fisheries Office. We are 99.999% meat fishery. So we have very, very little shell stock being landed. But in recent years, we've seen more of that product come across. There's all of the big boats, the what we call the limited access fleet. They're really prohibited from landing shell stock. The shell stock is being landed by smaller day boats, both in the Northern Gulf of Maine and then some products coming along the Massachusetts coast. We don't see a lot of it really south of Massachusetts. I believe that they're prohibited from landing shell stock in Maine. So, this is a pretty Massachusetts issue, both federally and obviously in the state. This has become a more prominent issue, as I've mentioned, in recent years. And so we've taken a lot more time and sort of notice about shell stocking, and we've worked a lot with industry. We talked with Jared a couple of years ago, and we made some adjustments to regulations to make things a little more clear about landing limits and other issues. But as far as sort of closures go, we don't really have PSP closures in nearshore waters or any sort of closures with the pathogens like we've been talking about here. There is a larger PSP closure offshore on Georges Bank, and we don't really see any attempts at landing live scallops that far out. Most of the live products being caught much closer to shore. I'm not an expert because of that, I'm not an expert in any of the FDA sort of procedures or the stuff Chrissy was talking about, which knows far more than I do about those things. But I guess I would just say that, as working for NOAA, I would just kind of echo what Dan said. We are here if you have any questions about things, if you think there's things we can improve. We're happy to listen to that. We work very closely with the New England Fishery Management Council to manage this stock, and the staff there, along with myself, I think we take a lot of care in the work we do, and we're happy to help folks whenever we can. And so I don't know if folks have my contact information, if we can make that available. Anyways, if you contact the Gloucester office, it's there. My name is Travis Ford, and I'd be happy to take any questions if folks had something federally they want to talk about, and I'm always available. If folks have questions moving forward.
Thanks, Travis.
Yeah,
And
Travis, I'll
thank-
copy your contact information from the website into the chat for folks.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate your presence and your contributions, and I appreciate you being there for calls from us when, we have these same questions. So thanks. Okay, I guess that's it for scallops. We can move on to the second and third parts of the meeting, and Jared Silver, I'm gonna let you take this.
Sure. So, this next little segment will be, kind of expectations for this year's, Nantucket Sound Trawl Fleet Fishery. We try to usually have this meeting with you folks once a year in person, but, with the emerging scallop issue, we felt getting everyone, the whole mobile gear fleet together and dealing with both issues in the same meeting, would be best, particularly as we're gonna have some in-person public hearings on some of these proposals, coming up at the end of the month. Quota outlooks, the summer flounder quota is taking a really large hit. This season it's a 56% reduction for 2024 from 2023. This is, part of this is a 42% reduction in the coastwide quota, responding to the 2023 stock assessment, which found that the stock is overfishing is occurring rather. The prior assessment overestimated biomass, and the biomass is trending down due to below average recruitment since 2011. The other part of this reduction is coming from a return back to our baseline state allocation of 6.82%. I believe when the quota gets above 8.5 million pounds for the coast, additional quota is reallocated. The quota available above that 8.5 million pounds is allocated to the states to the north at higher levels. So when we were dealing with large quotas the past couple of years, our state share got up close to about 9%. But now with this quota reduction, we're back to the baseline. So we're taking a 42% cut in the coastwide quota, and then an additional cut as we return back to our baseline. Based on this near 600,000 pound quota for this year, we're looking at about a 420,000 pound allocation for the summer fishery. And just yesterday, we announced the end of the directed period 1 fishery, effective next Tuesday, and a reduction of that down to a bycatch limit of 100 pounds. We anticipate that vessels are probably going to forego landing in Massachusetts now and land in the other states in which they're permitted from that offshore fleet. So we don't expect a lot of landings to continue at that 100-pound limit. Horseshoe crab, the bait quota is going to remain at 140,000 crabs for this year. Last year, we took about 140,000 crabs, about 99.8%. Closed that fishery on in early August. That will remain the same this year, same as the biomed quota of 200,000 crabs. There are some public hearing proposals I'll get to on the next slide regarding horseshoe crabs. Scup, the quota is increasing from 8,500 pounds to about 1.8 million pounds for the summertime fishery. We've been underutilizing that quota for years since it's been up. So I mean, we'll land what we land, but we'll have a large amount of quota that'll likely be an underage. Sea bass is also going up slightly, about 100,000 pounds. We closed that fishery last year in early September. We're expecting no changes to the limits on that fishery for this year, but it will just provide additional season and likely allow for fishing activity to continue into October and maybe even November while folks are tauging. So anticipated rule changes. I am keeping my fingers crossed that I'll be getting a public hearing notice out tomorrow before I log off for the weekend to hold public hearings on February 28th and 29th, 28th of the Maritime, 29th up in Gloucester. They're gonna be marathon hearings dealing with everything from horseshoe crabs to striped bass, to menhaden, to shellfish, to permitting. So that'll be a fun time, but relevant to you folks in the trawl fishery south of the Cape. Wanted to kind of give you an update on what we've proposed to the commission this fall on summer flounder, horseshoe crabs, whelk, and smooth dogfish. So for summer flounder, given the quota reduction in performance in recent years, we're proposing to maintain the current period 2 season, summertime season of April 23rd through September 30th with the current trip limits. But since we don't want this fishery to close really early, what we're considering is building in a trigger that will automatically reduce the trip limit to 400 pounds for nets and 200 pounds for hooks if 75% of the quota is taken before August 1st, as a way to keep the fishery active but bleed those landings in through the later half of the summer. That will also, as folks, both dealers and industry members have said to me over the past few years, is they'd really like to take advantage of the higher price in May and early June before Rhode Island and other states directed fisheries open, and that price drops, which we usually see around July 4th. So, this will enable a higher trip limit in that early summer, late spring, early summertime period where there's a better price, and hopefully by reducing that trip limit, bleed that fishery out through the rest of the summer to make a full season out of it. Similarly, if for some reason, landings are low, effort is low, we'll similarly increase the trip limit to 800 pounds for all gears if less than 75% of the quota is taken by September 1. We're also moving to permanently or to adjust the regulations to reduce the offshore trip limits from 10,000 pounds to 5,000 pounds. We did it for the period 1 fishery by declaration. This would do it by regulation, and would similarly do it for the fall fishery should there be any quota left, which I don't anticipate there will be. Horseshoe crabs, we're proposing again to implement a spawning closure that would prohibit all harvest from April 14th to June 7th. We're looking to establish a 300-pound trip limit for all permitted harvesters, regardless of gear type, and maintain the current 75 crab open access limit for non-permitted mobile gear fishers. And like the summer flounder fishery, adopt some triggers to adjust the trip limits downwards or upwards in the season automatically without having to go to the commission. The first would be to reduce the trip limit to 200 crabs if 80% of the quota is taken before September 16th. And then increase it to 400 crabs if more than 50% of the quota remains available on August 4th. The first is to try to the first is to keep some quota available during the fall and early winter to accommodate some mobile gear fishing, particularly local shellfish dredge fisheries that do get a bycatch of horseshoe crabs. And then the other would be to, if we have a lot of bait quota available, to utilize that bait quota before the season ends. For whelk, we're going to stay at the minimum gauge size for a period of 3 years, and we're hoping that during that period, SMAST will be able to bring on a student to begin a management strategy evaluation for the channeled whelk fishery. So this will maintain the current gauge of 3 1/8 inch until at least April 15th, 2027. The current minimum size applies to both knobbed and channel whelk. We have received some requests from industry to consider decoupling the management of these two species and identifying a different strategy for knobbed whelk and potentially going back to a lower gauge size that we will take under consideration. And the last one is last year we did an in-season adjustment to increase the smooth dogfish trip limit from 100 pounds to 300 pounds. I believe Mark Plakowitz was the advocate of that one. We did that kind of in season this year. We're looking to codify that a lot of that information is confidential given there's so few dealers and harvesters involved, but it seemed to help us better utilize the quota. We still didn't take it, but we took more of it. And that 300-pound limit seems to have worked for the few folks that do land smooth dogfish. So those are the options, and I'll take any questions and comments on that right now. Keep in mind, we will be going to public hearing at the Maritime in 27 days on this, so you're welcome to just chew on it for the next 4 weeks and talk to me then. Mark
Yeah,
Blackwitz?
That makes sense, Jared, to mainly take questions on this.
Yeah.
Because we're technically not in rulemaking yet, not until we post that public hearing, but go ahead,
Yeah.
Mark.
Well, I'd like to agree with splitting up the whelks. I think they're two. I think that's a great idea. Jared, could you go back to the landings and quota
Sure.
page you had? So from what I see on the SCUP, I think we could triple the weekly SCUP limit in state waters, based on the landings. And I think that would help some of us out. Go from 10,000 to 30,000.
We could look at that for an in-season adjustment, Dan. We haven't done any analysis into that.
I mean, we
think the
landed
last we looked
500
at it, we didn't have many
547.
landings at any type of elevated level.
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
So go ahead, Mark.
Well, the thing is, if you have the opportunity, that if you have the opportunity to catch 30,000 a week, if given the opportunity, some of us might attempt it. And
Mhm.
I think, especially with the way it's at a weekly aggregate, it's something that maybe we could make a couple bucks at, and we got plenty of quota. So why not let us try?
Yeah, yeah, bring that comment to the hearing next month. So we just want to give, this is just to give you guys an idea of what you're gonna be seeing imminently. So, you'll have another good shot at that. And we'll be coming up to Gloucester for that second hearing, right, Jared? On the
Yeah,
29th?
on the 29th. So
Okay,
anything else, Mark?
That's it for right now.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dominic Santora?
Hi, Jared. I'll keep my comments till public hearing, but I do have a question. What did we catch for the summer season in 2023 on Fluke? We're allowed 420 for 24, but what did we catch for the summer season in 23?
I said to myself, Dominic, before this meeting, I was going to pull that number, and then I went in a different direction. But I think it was about 600,000 pounds, a little under 600,000 pounds.
So if we fished at the same rate that we did last year, that our season would close quite a bit earlier. Is that what we're looking at?
The season would probably close in mid-August, which is part of the reason why we went to that, are thinking about that, trigger to reduce to 400 pounds once the quota is taken.
All right, I guess I'll save the comment, but I'll throw it out quick here that we might look at a little bit lower trip limit on the start rather than 600. That's all, just so we know that we get the season out of it.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. And Phil Misha, how you doing, Phil?
Hi there. Good evening. Where do we stand with the winter blackback, winter flounder? Can we look at starting a conversation this year and get it raised up to 750 pound possession so we can better utilize what's available to us? It's not profitable to target the 500. So that's why we're underperforming. Can we get the ball rolling on that?
Yeah, that would have to be done through ASMFC, because that trip limit is set in the plan, but we can talk to Nicola about what the options are and how to proceed with that.
Okay, thank you. And my other item is, I've mentioned it before, but sometimes when we're making that last tow to hopefully get our fluke limit and we exceed it by a bushel or 100 pounds, we've got most of us have the VMS system. We have to do a pre-landing. Some of our product, we come in and we'll offload, and some of the product doesn't get offloaded till the next day. So we've got some great accountability, and I'd like to get this moving forward where we can perhaps have a landing limit of the 600 of fluke, but be in possession of perhaps 700. And we do a pre-landing and make enforcement or the authorities aware of the extra 100 pounds, so that the next day, so we're not dumping that 100 pounds, and the next day we can start the day off with that 100. I think it's a better use of the resource, better stewardship. I think we could, it makes a lot of sense. And especially with the fact that the boats are struggling, and we have our good days and we have our bad days, and sometimes they come easy one day, and that extra 100 pounds would help out the next day when a lot of times we don't get our limit. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. All right, Dan, we can move on to the last couple pieces here, and these are you.
Yep, thanks. So I hope there's a few folks left on the call that participate in the surf clam fishery. You know, we are running a pilot program on the use of the same tracker technology that the offshore lobster fleet, I'm sorry, the federally permitted lobster fleet has right now. And we think it could be very helpful for us in managing this surf clam fishery. One of the challenges we have with the surf clam fishery right now is was a court decision that's now 9 years old, but it ruled that the Wetlands Protection Act can be enforced by a town that could basically ban hydraulic clam dredging in town waters. And Provincetown was one municipality that was involved in the litigation, but the decision obviously goes beyond Provincetown. So conceivably, at this point, municipalities could prevent clam dredging under the Wetlands Protection Act. It would supersede the DMF authority to regulate it. So, but we haven't in the 9 years since that decision, and then there was an appeals court decision 2 years later. So in the 7 years since that decision came down, it reinforced it. There hasn't really been any forward movement on how to deal with that interpretation of the law. And so what I am trying to accomplish is dealing with the Department of Environmental Protection that has real interest in protecting eelgrass, as we do, but the Wetlands Protection Act, does take or does attempt to protect important resources like eelgrass, and I believe, as director, that we can and we should do all that we can to prevent any clam dredging in eelgrass beds. And what I'd like to do is to use this technology, work with the fleet, work with the municipalities, and replace the 12 and 20-foot seasonal contour lines, which were adopted in 1981, 82, but have never evolved. And I think we need to replace those with some fixed coordinates that would be more straight lines or keep the vessels out of sensitive areas. And I think this would be extremely beneficial, and also very convincing for any of the folks in this debate that think that the Department of Environmental Protection should be or could be regulating fishing. And so my hope is to work with the fleet, and we've done that, and build polygon closures around sensitive habitats. And, you know, this is called geofencing. You know, this is 2024. We in the mid-90s, we actually considered altering some of those lines, the 12 and 20-foot contours. But at the time, and I was working with DMF back then, and I've seen the memo, and it says, well, we should postpone because something called GPS is coming. And so that's been a long time since GPS has been established and is now, you know, could be used quite effectively, I think, with these new devices. So that's the objective of the program. And if you go to the next slide, I just want to inform folks that we've delivered 5 vessel monitoring devices free of charge. DMF is paying for these to interested vessels. We've got 2 vessels that are working with this technology. We're seeing the data. We're planning on giving out some more, at least one more device to give out. We've sent out an FAQ to the fleet, the permit holders, and we do think that this could be a successful way to manage this fishery. We want to sit down, you know, once we get a little bit of data under our belts, we want to sit down with the participating vessels and talk about, you know, ways we could create these polygons. In essence, you know, locate these sensitive areas, especially eelgrass, and basically wall them off. And if the boat were to go into an area, there would be a message that could come, you know, to the vessel owner or the vessel captain that the boat is entering, you know, an area that they shouldn't be in. So one of the things we need to test is how precise the you know, these are, and do we have to have buffer zones like around the eelgrass? Like how tight can the boat go to an area that we don't want them to fish? So this is a high priority for me. Even though the fleet is small, it's probably no more than about a dozen active vessels. I think a total of about 3 dozen who have permits in the state. I really feel that DMF needs to be the primary agency involved with fisheries management, and it would get very, very complicated fast if the decisions were made going forward that this is considered a form of dredging, or that municipalities could use their authority to basically regulate the kinds of fishing that generates suspended sediment. I mean, that's basically what it would come down to. And so I think we're going to need legislative help, because the courts made their decision because the law was kind of, you know, it wasn't clear, it wasn't clarified. And so the judge and the judges at the time said, well, in the absence of any clarifying language in the law, we're going to assume that both authorities still exist. So, but anyway, I would really urge anyone that's involved or interested in the surf clam fishery to reach out to us and try to participate in this, because I think this is your best shot at maintaining the fishery and having a say in how this fishery is going to be managed. And I do worry about the negative outcomes of the alternatives. So anyway, we're working on this, and I'll just take any questions, but it's a work in progress, and I just wanted everybody to be aware of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and make a gentle request for a cooperation in this program.
Yeah, Dan, so at this point, do we just want to pivot and take questions not only on the pilot program, but just any general questions, comments, or concerns the folks in the fleet may have?
Sure, either.
All right. So I appeared Andrew Walsh's hand raise function was broken, so I'm going to give him the mic if he wanted to raise something on the fluke fishery. So Andrew, floor is yours.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can. How are you?
All right, great. Yeah, I tried hitting that button about 15 times. Thank you. I just was curious about the pilot program. I've been watching from afar the last few years. Obviously, I haven't been involved in the fishery in the last few years, but I like what I've been seeing with the, I saw the pilot program going to affect weekly aggregate limits, freeing up with the allowing, liberalization and allowing fishermen to be able to be more flexible with the rules. And I wanted to know how that's been working out and whether you guys planned on continuing that into 2024. I'm thinking about getting back into doing a little state fishing again. Obviously, I left a while back, when rules were tight, and I'd like to, give it a shot again. If you guys plan on keeping the rules a little looser, like you have the last few years.
Yeah, so my recollection, and without having the information in front of me, is we disbanded that program either last year or the year prior, when we had trip limits that we felt were sufficiently high to accommodate state waters fishing. But if we are going to move back to a lower trip limit level, and folks are going to be, still having to steam out east, and a lower trip limit isn't going to accommodate a 2-day trip, then I think that's something we'd be willing to look at, since we did have it at a lower quota regime, more on par with where we are today than where we were the past few years. I hadn't considered it for 2024, but I think maybe that's something that we could add to the public comment at the upcoming hearings. If folks in the fleet had some interest in that we'd certainly be interested in hearing from them as to what their thoughts on that were.
Thank you. Thank you, Jared.
Yep.
And also, just another comment. I've noticed even with allowing small mesh to at least be aboard the boat, not using it while fluking and stuff like that, it seems like he's trying to switch over a little bit more to line up the rules with the federal rules, and what other states are doing. And I was wondering if that was something that you guys wanted to continue working on. Basically bringing the Massachusetts state rules as far as what you're allowed for twine size and stuff for different species, more in line with other states like Rhode Island and New York and the federal fishery.
Would this be going to 5.5 on fluke? Is that the question?
5.5 on fluke would be one question. That would be bringing it in. One other thing, I'm not even so concerned about the 5.5 on fluke. I'm a 6.5-inch bag catches them fine. For scup fishing and for other stuff like that, other states in the federal fishery, you're allowed to use, your squid net, drop the liner, and put a bigger bag on. Is that something that the state would, consider moving forward and discussing? At least,
I think that's something that we were to move forward and discuss. We'd have to investigate, and I'd defer to Bob on what we have available in terms of staffing to investigate questions like that.
All right, I appreciate it. That's it was just a question, and I'm not looking for something to change today. It was just something I wanted to bring up, and I appreciate the rule changes that you guys have been making. They're moving in a direction that, helps the fleet and gives more flexibility. And I do really appreciate what I've been seeing the last few years.
Thanks, Andrew.
Anyone else?
No.
All right, I'm not seeing any other hands raised, Dan, so.
All right. Thanks everybody for attending this meeting. I think it's important, and I hope it was educational, especially the complicated sea scallop rules. I said it before, but I'll say it again. Please call us and we'll help you as much as we can to keep you within the law, so that we don't have the kind of incidents that happened last time, and to some degree there was some misunderstanding or really failure to educate folks about these different layers of rules. I hope tonight's presentations, brought some clarity to how these different rules get layered on top of one another, and then the net result is what you can and can't do. So we know it's complicated, but we'll do everything we can to help you figure this out. At the end of the day, we're being overseen by a federal program, and I don't want to blame the feds, because honestly, that same federal program makes sure that other states, you know, with whatever situation they're dealing with in their state waters, if they're shipping shellfish to us, whether it be oysters or quahogs or live scallops, that they're also abiding by these important public health standards. So, you know, we're not necessarily, averse to compliance with this, but we just want you to know that a lot of this may not be under our control, but as Jared mentioned, there is the potential for long-term changes in the model ordinance, and if we can make a good case, we can make some changes in some areas. So we'll work with you. Please work with us, and we wish you well. So to wrap up, we're pretty sure we're going to have public hearings the last 2 days of the month. Watch your emails. We think we're going to be announcing that before close of business tomorrow. So thanks again, and have a great night.